A big reason why people who were neglected as children struggle to form stable, lasting relationships is because of insecure attachment. Now, you might rush in and then get enmeshed with someone you just met, and then kind of freak out when it becomes clear that just because you're sleeping together, the commitment and predictability of a real relationship isn't there, or it isn't there yet. Now, if you're not clear what you want, not just in your mind, but in your words and your actions, you're unlikely to end up in a situation that makes you happy. And the shame of it is, you may be pushing away perfectly good people who like you, but they're put off by the odd behaviors that come out when you're trying to hide how you actually feel, how confused you are and scared. My letter today is from a woman I'll call Clara, and she writes, "Hi, crappy childhood fairy. I'm 22, and since I was 11, I've been struggling with love and self-worth matters." Got my fairy pencil. I'm going to circle things to come back to on a second reading, but let's see what's going on with Clara. I really hope you can read this and help me with your experience. My parents separated when I was 6, and my mom was an emotionally unavailable caretaker. My father was out of the picture, but kind of present when I was little, and I remember trying to spend time with them at night since they worked all day, but he was tired and he threatened to hit me if I didn't go to bed, and a few times he did, for that or for other things. Later on, he went on to have another family, which he's committed to. Some years later, my mom got a boyfriend, and they traveled a lot around the world. At that time, I was 10, and I felt really lonely, even though I lived with a lot of family members. Oh, golly, yeah. You got abandoned. I usually got treated like a punching bag by my grandpa, who was like my father figure. He was sweet with me when I was a little child, but then he began treating me like I was dumb and obnoxious. My aunt also, she could be quite mean and accused me of not letting my mom be happy. And since I cried when she went away and I got treated like a manipulative child, I played rough with my brother, but since he was 8 years older sometimes, when he hit me, it hurt more than it was fun, so I cried. But always I got treated like the problem. And I got yelled at since I was the one with the high-pitched voice. I was the inconvenience. Aside from that, I really looked up to my brother. Oh, I can kind of see where the trouble that might be ahead for you. So then Clara writes, well, around when I was 11, I met my first partner in school, and he was 7 years older, and it was a real toxic relationship with textbook manipulation and abuse, which lasted 3 years. Clara, I'm so sorry. I think I even see that as worse than you seem to see it. And you see it as bad, but that's terrible. That's just terrible. You were 11. So 11 to 14, I guess. I'm taking some details out because on YouTube, these details would affect who can see this video because it's so brutal. So bad things happen. And Clara got into drugs and alcohol. She says, but I didn't have any friends at that time, only that guy and a lot of lies. So when I ended the relationship and told my mom, she said that I had broken her trust and that I would have to put effort to earn it back. So your mom blamed you for getting exploited as a little child while she wasn't paying attention. I'm so sorry, Clara. That's just wrong. She said that I had broken her trust and that I would have to put effort to earn it back, which hurt since I was alone and still a child, and now we have a sort of good relationship. Eventually, I embarked on other love pursuits, a lot of limerence and situationships, none that lasted more than 2 months, and none that was quite healthy until today. So 6 months ago, I started talking with a guy, and we shared interests and found that the picture he took carried a melancholic view that was quite near my feelings, along with music he shared that was the same, that helped me through my adolescence. 2 months ago, so they met 6 months ago, then 2 months ago, they started going out, and he told me he ended an 8-year-long relationship 2 years ago, which ended badly. We spent time together as a couple. He stayed in my house and we slept together every time we met. We went to the movies, to the theater, to parks. We had picnics. We ate out. Sometimes I had to work on some papers. I'm in my 4th year of college, and he slept on my bed while I worked and things like that. Some time ago, we were going to meet and he canceled at the last minute. I told him I understand, and then we didn't speak for a week until I asked him how he was doing, and everything carried out as always. But now I had a lot more doubts and fears. During the week, I cried a lot, not knowing what was happening, thinking maybe he didn't want to see me again, or maybe he just got bored. 2 weeks ago, we went to see a movie, and the morning after, he asked me if I was more into monogamy or polygamy, and I told him monogamy, and he kissed me and said, "Nice, me too." And I thought, well, that's a good sign, since I want a relationship. And a few hours later, I asked him if he wanted to meet more people, and he said, "No, not for now," which made me feel uncomfortable, like he was with me while somebody else showed up. And I asked if he would tell me if he met someone else, and he said, "Yes, would you?" So it's interesting. There's this escalation into this talk, like it's as if he said to you, no, he does want to meet other people, and you're sort of like, well, will you tell me if it happens? But he said he didn't. I don't know. You've been dating only 2 months, so that's okay. I'm going to zero in on that. And I told him yes. So he said, he said, "Would you?" And I told him yes. You would tell him if you're dating somebody else. And we didn't speak more on that. And some hours later, before he went home, you were churning, right? You were like worried about it. I asked him if we could speak so I could clear my mind. And so I told him, we're kind of like a friend with benefits, right? And he responded, sort of, you could say that. And I asked, you don't want any relationships, do you? So these are very leading questions. I'm just wondering about this, Clara. They're very leading. So I'm not sure where you got that. But when you say that, maybe you gave him the impression that that's where you were coming from. But it's hard to say. I wasn't there. It's hard to write what the conversation really was, isn't it? All right. So you said, so we're kind of friends with benefits, right? And he responded, sort of. You could say that. And I asked, you don't want any relationships? And he told me that he has envisioned being in a relationship with me. After his last relationship, he had lasted with me more than with anyone else he's tried going out with. But that he has fear of commitment and he feels safe with me because I'm kind. And he told me that he couldn't force himself to feel more for me, that he couldn't give me any security of the future, and that he felt uncomfortable because he thought he wasn't the person that could help me with my feelings. I had told him that I felt that he was playing with me, which kind of hurt since I wasn't asking for help or promises, which I made clear. I just wanted to know he had the will to stay and work things out as a couple, which he couldn't say. So Carla, actually, what I hear here, if I'm reading it correctly, is that you feel one way and you're trying to hide it and you're saying this other thing and sort of acting tough and going, so you don't want anything, right? And then you were hurt. You couldn't really, and he went, oh, okay, well, I guess it's casual. What I want to show you, Carla, is you had been dating him for 2 months. It's actually healthy for somebody not to have made a commitment to be in a relationship with you after 2 months. Now, you had decided together that you would have a sexual relationship. So that is one way that sometimes those of us with attachment wounds, or just anybody, can, we can say yes to that. We can feel like we ought to be fine with it. But then when it happens, there's this attachment there, and it feels terrible that the person is not committed to us. And this is why in my dating course and in my program, I teach people, just go slower than you think you need to. Go very slow. Once sex happens, bonding happens for many of us. So there are people who don't have that, and I don't know them, and I've tried not to go out with them. I'm interested in, committed relationships in my life, and I got it wrong many times. But going slow is how you can sort of get past the tendency to not see the red flags or to read too much into it or to take pessimism with you. What I hear here is I think you took some pessimism into this, like you wouldn't, your fear that he just wouldn't like you or be serious about you. I just didn't hear that coming from him until you sort of forced him to answer. And he sort of said, well, I can't be forced to say that right now. And that is appropriate for dating for 2 months. You're getting to know somebody. There's such a thing as people who make a commitment very quickly. They just know it's the right one. There is such a thing, but more often than not, especially with people who have CPTSD, rushing in is going to lead to heartbreak. So it's a slow build to get to know somebody. Go slowly. Don't bond with them yet. Don't even sleep together at first. Take your time with that. Get to know them and find out first how they feel about you. And if you really feel like you want to have that attachment to them, if you want to be into them that much, the way you're going to be if you sleep with somebody. So it already happened with this person, and there's a way that you can make an adjustment. But let's see what happened here. We didn't speak for a week, and then he wrote to me and asked if he could see me to talk and to give me back some shirts. So the day came, and I was ready for him to end things with me, but he told me he wanted to keep going out. I told him that I thought that wasn't a good idea, that I had noticed I was being selfish that last time. Selfish? This sounds very distorted, and it's totally okay with the childhood you had. I can just see how you just seem to be trying to guess what the emotional reality here is and trying to guess how you should be in relationship and what you should say. And I think you're punishing yourself for feeling like you expect too much from him. And he keeps surprising you, like he wasn't leaving you. He was just giving you some shirts. In fact, it sounds to me like he was trying to get an excuse to see you. And you said it wasn't a good idea to keep going out. And the last time we talked, you were trying to regulate your emotions and thoughts about us with his feedback, and that you didn't want to be selfish with him. I don't think that's what it is. You don't want to be rejected by him, is what it is. You don't want him, you're afraid he's being selfish. If I'm reading you correctly, you're trying to, you feel very out of control. You're trying to sort of grab a narrative that you think puts you in control, except the whole thing is dishonest. You love him. You want to keep going out with him. Here's the problem. And you're sabotaging yourself. But since it's the case that I do have insecurities and fears, I felt that every time I talk about something similar, he shuts down and goes silent. We can't go on. Okay, you're not going to like this, but you're being a bit manipulative here. You're being overly harsh with him. But I think what you're trying to say is, I have insecurities and fears, and I need to talk about these things more often than we did without having you shut down. But I'm wondering if you ever talked about it without sort of making threats and going, we're just friends with benefits. That's kind of a threat for somebody who actually is into you. So he asked me, you say, what he was missing. So he's wondering, like, why aren't you into me? And I said he wasn't missing anything. So he said that he didn't understand then why I thought why he didn't want to be with me, or why I thought he was going to leave. And at that moment, I couldn't say more than because I feel it. While thinking, you can't even say the contrary. See, but that's not fair. So you were feeling it. You had fear that you're going to get left. And, statistically, that can happen. That's not crazy, but I don't think that's what was happening. That's not where he was coming from. You're saying, but he wouldn't even say the contrary. So you were testing him to go, you don't even care about me. And then you're like, is he going to say, yes, I do? But he's just, I think it's entirely possible. He's just put off. He's hurt. He's like, what is this? Why are you treating me like this? I told him that I felt that if we kept going out of fear, he would stay the same and that I would fall even more. And then he slightly irritated said, okay, look, I don't want to force you to do anything, and I won't force myself to do it. I told him I didn't want to force him either, and then we parted. So what I'm hearing there, if I'm hearing you correctly, is you were trying to force him to make this assertion that he wants to be with you, and you were putting him on the spot. If you keep going, you're going to fall more and he won't be into it. And he's just noticing he can't really promise that he's going to fall in love with you. He's just dating you right now. What I want to teach you, Carla, is the difference between dating and being in a relationship. So you were dating a guy and it was going pretty well, but your heart was having a relationship. And how would you know that with your crappy parents and how they didn't take care of you? How would you even know? So you get to know now. You're with us now, and we can help you. I'm going to talk you through this. You were dating. You were not in a relationship. And it's understandable, especially because it was dating with sex, that it's like your mind and your heart and your body are like in a relationship. That's just how it works for some of us. It's more common in women than men. It's more common in traumatized people than non-traumatized people. So you've won the lottery. You're a bonder. You feel connected to somebody through sex, which is why I say if you go slow, you don't have that bond that ends up leaving you like, what even is this relationship? Oh gosh, now I love you. Now I'm connected to you. Now I'm going to break down if it doesn't work out. And I know that's not right. So I'm ashamed and I have to hide how I feel. That's kind of how I interpret your actions here. So you said, Not once he told me, I want to be with you. Not once he told me that he could consider a relationship with me without buts, or that he was willing to keep trying with me while recognizing my feelings and knowing that both of us are wounded in different ways and with different fears. I was willing to make the effort to accommodate, and I felt he wasn't willing even to try and understand me. So maybe this is the thing with him, that he's kind of avoidant, that he's uncomfortable with these emotional conversations. But a little bit I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, because you're being overly harsh. You're being a little bit manipulative there, and I mean that in the nicest way, but you're trying to get him to say something by saying something mean. You don't love me. Yes, I do. Oh, he didn't say that. He must not. So you're trying to measure his worth and what his intentions are and how good he is by whether he passed this test that was way too much for a 2 months of dating relationship. Here's the thing about partners and relationships. It's not really their job to, it is their job to listen. It is their job to observe your boundaries. It is their job to be honest with you. But it's not their job to understand all the reasons why you feel the way you feel. I think you could do a lot better dating without putting this huge expectation that people have this deep parent-like understanding with you. Instead, you can use dating to get to know somebody and to let information come to you about, who are they? What are they? How do they feel about you? Let them tell you. You don't have to drag it out of them. It's interesting. I was just talking to a friend about this yesterday. You don't have to go questing to find out how they feel. You just have to sit back and observe. It helps a lot if you're not sleeping with the person. You can keep your expectations moderate and just notice, how do they act towards me? How often do they call? Do they follow through? If they say they're going to call this weekend, do they? And you can start to observe and notice, how do I feel when I'm waiting for them to call? How do I feel when I'm around them? These are your cues that it might be worth going a little next step with them. So that's dating. That's dating. You said, I know he doesn't feel the same way I do, since he told me I can't force myself to feel more for you. And again, I think that makes sense. It's 2 months in. But still, I can't be satisfied with my decision, Carla says. I miss him, and I can't shake the fact that he wanted to keep seeing me and that there was still a lot of care and affection. So this reminds me on some levels of letters I get from people who have been dating somebody who tells them flat out, I don't want a relationship. This is just friends with benefits. They shock them with this news that that's how they see them. Oh no, this is never going anywhere. And then the letter writers write to me and say, oh, but I can't stop thinking about them. I just think somehow if I were different. It's one thing if they said they weren't interested, but this guy kept saying he was interested. He just wasn't all the way in a relationship with you yet. So in your case, Clara, I think there might be some unfinished business here. I think you may have left too early, and this is not just a simple matter of correcting the record. I think it's time for you to be working on yourself with a therapist or in my program or a 12-step program, but something where you're getting help to process your emotions and get a reality check so you're not coming in hot when you're scared, when you're worried you're going to get abandoned, because you have an abandonment wound. Abandonment wounds are hard to deal with. And what's a really good thing to do is to deal with it in your own time. And then when you're in the early stages of dating somebody, you're not hitting them with this, you're abandoning me, you can't do this, you're mistreating me because I feel this. I think even when people treat us well, the abandonment wound will put us into pain. It's just going to happen. So we got to do a lot of healing to have a successful dating relationship. And if this guy is wonderful, as you say, and the connection you feel, who knows, maybe this can be salvaged. But one thing would be good to be able to tell him and say, I'm sorry that I jumped the gun. I actually really liked you. I wanted this to work out. I couldn't stop thinking about you. I've decided to get help and start working on my emotions because I know that when I went into fear, I just started pushing you away. Another word for this, Carla, is disorganized attachment, where you're really into somebody, but when they're right there, you push them away. Disorganized attachment. It's a very difficult attachment wound to have. It's a style. And it takes a lot of work, really steady work, to learn to come to the center, not to either rush in with them and not to push them away almost arbitrarily. It will seem arbitrary to them, but not to you. So before we talked, he hugged me and everything was well. His affection always felt sincere, and it hurts to know that maybe if I didn't have my insecurities, maybe if I didn't have a bad history of relationships, I would be content with going out, even if he doesn't call it a relationship, even if he doesn't talk about an us. So yeah, not at 2 months. It's okay. It's okay that he's not doing you wrong there. 2 months. These days, I've been thinking that maybe I should have stayed as long as I get to keep his embrace, which feels like home. I don't have anywhere else. I'm really hurting with my decision, even though I know it was for the best, because I know that if I stayed, things probably would have changed, since he has fear of commitment, and I can't be calm as long as he tells me something he can't say. Something along the words, I want to be with you. I would like to build up from this connection with you. All right, Carla, I'm just going to put in front of you. How about 6 months? If you can date somebody, maybe that's, 3 to 6 months that you date somebody without sleeping with them, and then without pressuring them, you just wait to see what they say they feel for you, and just see if you hear those words. Not with you chasing after them and threatening them. That's a bad way to get that love expressed. All of this feels like a punch in the gut. I feel like I gave him a lot and that he took it with no fear, no disgust, no rejection, and more. And he gave back to me tenderly and passionately. It hurts me that he cannot be direct with his refusal to be in a relationship with me. I think he has been direct. I didn't hear the whole conversation, but he just said, I can't do that yet. And I can't promise that's where it's going. And that is the nature of dating. We date to find out if that's where it's going. Everything feels like interpretations, insinuations, since he wanted to keep seeing me. It felt mutual, and with him by my side, everything felt nice, but I couldn't shake the idea that I was sure I wanted to be with him and that he simply didn't know. It's okay. That's normal. It's normal to know when the other person doesn't know yet. That it felt like he was testing the ground and that my fears were an inconvenience to him. Yeah, because this is the harsh truth. Having CPTSD and having the amount of fear that we have, especially when we're not healed yet, and I think you got some healing to do, it isn't very pleasant to be on the receiving end of that. It's hard because no matter what people say, they can't really fix it for us. Isn't that surprising? No matter what they say, it doesn't, they can't reassure you. It's not realistic for somebody at 2 months to go, I absolutely know you're the one. It has happened to some people. That doesn't mean it's stuck. The slow and steady route is the healthy one. You said you felt like you were in a relationship, but since you couldn't talk about it, it cannot be called that. So no, it's really normal and correct not to call it a relationship yet. This is the first time that I leave a situationship without depleting it. Interesting. Normally I leave when there is nothing left, and I feel like that's what's more troubling. We still care for each other, and both of us wanted to keep going, but with different terms. And I guess it is better this way so we don't hold more resentment later. But I feel really sad. I've been working on myself after every bad experience, trying to see my mistakes and working on them and on being better and being well while alone, enjoying my company and that of others. But it hurts so much to lose someone over my insecurities and conceptions of love. Yeah. I know I don't ask for something wacky. I just want him to acknowledge we were a relationship and maybe hopefully that he would have enough hope in it to keep building it with me. But even though I know that what I want is valid, I'm still left feeling like I'm too intense. And we spent 3 months together and I didn't want to force anything on him. I held back from expressing too much to not make him feel uncomfortable. No, I think you did make him feel uncomfortable. I just want to give you, this is what I hear. Not because you're bad, but just because, you're just you. You have your feelings. And he was uncomfortable. He couldn't go there that fast. But still, I feel like a problem, like I'll always end up alone for being too much, like I'll always feel more than the other person. And this time I chose to stay back to protect myself, but I keep feeling like it wasn't the right choice. All right. So, Clara, this is what I think. I think this one might be a keeper, and it might be worth apologizing to him while you work on yourself. And if he is willing to talk to you or see you and isn't yet in a new relationship, then maybe you guys can have a chat and see where it goes. And just see if you agree with me that maybe you jumped the gun on trying to force him to acknowledge it as a relationship when it was still so new, that you could apologize and reset. Just do a reset and say, it's okay if we date. And this time, what you can do differently is not sleep with him. It's going to be very difficult for somebody with your level of attachment wound to pace a relationship when sex is going on. It's sort of like, what is it? The calf is out of the barn. Whoa, all the feelings are going anyway. So you've been apart for a while. You have a chance to slow it down now and see where it is and allow communication to be how this relationship comes together. Now, if he doesn't want to slowly get to know you, maybe there isn't anything there. You can play it by ear. But just consider 3 to 6 months to be a more reasonable window to date somebody actually reserving your heart. And when you do talk about your feelings, tell the real ones. Now, feelings can be too much. It's true. When we have CPTSD, we can overwhelm people. There's a lot of pain from the past kind of leaking into whatever's hurting us in present time. And people are like, whoa, I don't even know what you're talking about. It doesn't make sense to me that you're feeling this strongly about it. So that's why we come off as too much. You won't always be too much if you work on your healing. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. These are 4 common trauma responses that you might slip into when you are under stress. You probably have one dominant trauma response and the others show up from time to time. But today I want to talk about the freeze response and the different ways it can show up and sabotage your life. Something stressful happens or it triggers you neurologically so that you get dysregulated. That's what we mean when we say triggered here. Dysregulated feels like spaced out, discombobulated, confused, very emotional, but not necessarily in the right proportion to what's happening. And then maybe the freeze response shows up as not being able to speak up, your ability to express yourself, to defend yourself, or to run away or say the thing that needs to be said. It gets frozen. Or the flip side, in that moment of discombobulation, you blurt something out that maybe you feel but was not at all what you meant to express. It could be something offensive, hurtful, irrelevant, just somehow not what you wanted the other person to hear. This is when the freeze response kind of explodes. So the freeze response arises in people who felt deeply attacked and threatened as kids. And you could call it a survival mechanism. It is, because it's very much what some animals do when they can't escape a predator, and it's their last-ditch attempt to get the predator to leave them alone. But like all trauma-driven strategies, the freeze response stops working. It doesn't keep you safe. Freezing up in the face of trouble is not actually a way to avoid trouble. It's a way that trouble can engulf you and sabotage you. My letter today is from a woman I'll call Caitlyn, and she writes, "Hello, Fairy. I was in a relationship for 6 months. I'm 50 years old, and I fell deeply in love. I've got my pencil. I'm going to read Caitlyn's letter. It's a little longer than usual, but I think you need all the details to hear what's going on. She's got a very complicated situation. And I will come back. I'm just going to read all the way through, and I'll circle things I want to come back to, and then we'll go through another time, and I'll talk about the things that I flagged here. So 50 years old, fell deeply in love. The man was super aware and sensitive, and during our time together, it became apparent that I have CPTSD. I did and said numerous things that made him feel unimportant, and in his words, destabilized our relationship every month. Prior to meeting him, I was in a 23-year relationship, says Caitlyn, with a man who cheated on me repeatedly. He left me for a much younger woman who was a friend. I fell into a deep depression and basically had a breakdown. After 1.5 years, I finally got to a place of being okay. I met this new man and he melted me, despite my uncertainty that I was ready for a new relationship. In retrospect, he wanted me to dive in so deeply and quickly that I was feeling in deep water. However, the connection between us was so beautiful and special. I remember packing a suitcase, calling a taxi, and moving out. I lived with the parents of the man who got me pregnant while he was in the Army training. My mom disowned me. And I remember seeing her at the local shops with my younger siblings. She ignored me. She was also pregnant. We gave birth weeks apart. Can you imagine the shame and pain, etc.? I still keep this part of my life secret from my much younger siblings and want to expose it. My dad asked me to move home at 8 months pregnant. I had the baby, and I gave the baby up for adoption. The baby's dad filed for custody and was successful. I tried to be in contact at various points of my life, but they had moved out of my country, and I never succeeded at this. Back to the now. During the recent relationship, it became evident that I'm still carrying shame and guilt from the past. I was not able to initiate or go to the next level of relationship with this man, who I felt so loved by and attracted to. He felt like an absolute gift. It was wondrous, yet I was self-sabotaging. He drew his boundaries and said even though he loved me deeply and it was devastating, there was only so much he could put himself through. Life turned into a nightmare and has been for the past few months. I'm doing what I can to work on myself. We're in communication a little bit still, and he's kind enough to be willing to hear what I'm uncovering. We talked about marriage, owning property together, planning a future together. I'm completely devastated. I felt like we had a future together and could be in service together. As you mentioned, that it's a sign of marriage if two people can be of service together. He's a mindfulness teacher and meditator, and I feel I have the gift of presence. He leads devotional singing, and I love to sing, especially with him. I asked him if he's looking for a new love since separating. He said he has taken the emphasis off finding a relationship and looking at other ways to grow and fill his time. I'm hoping he's allowing time and space for me to grow, even though he said it's not fair for him to expect me to grow in a matter of months. I'm caught in a cycle of grief and hope that there's a chance we can be together again forever this time, even though I know he's deeply and rightly cautious of the pain all of this caused. So this was the first letter I got from Caitlyn, and she told me all this, but I didn't understand, like, what exactly had she said that was so definitively devastating for the relationship. He seemed to really care about her. So what was it? So I asked her, and she clarified. These are some of the things she did that were upsetting to him, that were deal breakers. She said, I told him I still feel love for my previous ex of 23 years and had hoped we could rekindle. I told him that I asked my previous ex how his relationship was going with his new girlfriend at about at the 3-month mark in my relationship with Mark, which made him feel worthless and like a second choice. I was defensive and said I thought it was a measure of my detachment, but in the conversation last night, he said my attachment to my ex really caused a lot of difficulty for us. So I do concede it is an attachment wound of some kind that was not yet completely finished, although I knew I had to fully let go of my ex of 23 years in order to be in a new loving relationship. Just after Mark discussed moving into my house with me and being co-owners, I said perhaps I should sell my house and move back to another country where I lived for 2 years in an ashram with a teacher. I didn't think about it, but just blurted it out. I think it was an expression of my desire to be healed and whole. I didn't know if I could do while in a relationship and thought perhaps I had to choose the path of renunciation or of selling all and being with a guru. It might be some kind of inability to believe or accept in myself that I'm capable of being healthy and loving and whole in life. It might be the desire to run and hide from all the pain in my life. In another incident, I spoke to a friend who was also following this spiritual teacher, and she said that perhaps the life she has created for herself is a beautiful prison. And I went straight from that conversation to speaking to Mark on the phone and repeated it. He said I was implying our relationship was a prison, and I responded that I would have to make sure it wasn't. I think I was speaking from my past experience of relationship, but he could only understand it in relation to us. Okay. There are probably more examples that I'm not remembering right now, but what transpired after these conversations and words was that he would ask me for assurance, and I couldn't give it. I would go into shutdown. He works in mental health and told me I was having a freeze response. It got to the point where he became increasingly upset with me, which culminated in fiery outbursts. His anger, although somewhat mild to medium, also must have triggered me because my mother was angry and yelling at me into my 30s, exasperated at me for making such a mess of my life and not getting married or starting a family. It was the freeze response where it would take me days to be able to respond to his cries for reassurance. That hurt him so much and destabilized him also. He wasn't able to sleep next to me, suffered a lot of inner tension and pain, and felt completely unimportant to me. He hadn't cried for 17 years and said our love opened him to be able to cry again, yet he had to cry too often due to the pain he was also experiencing, wondering why he wasn't important to me. I also had lost my job during this time and was in survival mode, trying to make my house into an Airbnb and doing cash cleaning jobs to survive. So he always had to come to my house to see me, and I rarely visited him. I was so busy running around in circles, I couldn't stop or process or be still. I also have a cat I couldn't leave alone for long. I felt guilty about this, but was not able to change it. In our conversation last night, it became apparent again that the freeze response that was undermining my natural ability to be vulnerable and reliable. He said he loves me, there is no doubt, and he knows that I love him, but I have to accept that as we are now, it is done. For us to get back together, I have to grow past this freeze response and become trustable. He said the task of rebuilding trust between us would be an immense task. I told him there is nothing I want to do more, that I need to change for there to be any hope for us to get back together. The fear has become so overwhelming and the sense of loss so huge that it's become chronic anxiety. I recognize that I feel powerless and scared. My fear of telling my mother how wounding it was to be disowned is affecting my ability to be loving and vulnerable and reliable today. I spoke to her for the first time as an adult just a week ago about the teenage experiences and told her I'm still carrying guilt and shame around it and that I can't keep it a secret from the rest of my family anymore. She responded lovingly and said I shouldn't feel shame or guilt and offered to speak to my siblings about it. However, I was not able to tell her directly of the effect her emotional responses and actions have had on me. When I was speaking to Mark last night, I told him of this conversation and I started not being able to remember how she responded. The fear freeze response became apparent, sure, and that it is intimately connected to her. Mark said that she would have interpreted that I was stating, Mark said that she would have interpreted that I was stating shame and guilt around being pregnant, but none of the emotional wounding with her. She still had no emotional response to offer me. She said that surely my siblings know, as they were there when it all happened, which is of course basically impossible due to their ages. She offered to tell them about it for me, and I said yes. Mark said how disempowering it would be for her to tell them, and yet still none of my experience with her is validated or acknowledged. It feels like a sickening task for me to speak to her about it. I've become an extreme people pleaser and cognitively understand that my mother is the one I'm people pleasing the most. I think the wounds are so deeply ingrained into my being, like a coat of armor where I pretend that I'm an island, that I'm okay on my own. I'm okay being isolated and not valued in this life. The pattern has become so loud. It is on repeat in me in so many levels and layers of living, including my employment and friendships, and obviously my ability to have a loving relationship. In hope that my insights are right, my understanding is right, and that I have the courage to speak to my mom and family and truly heal myself and possibly find love at the end of it. That's how she's signing off. Caitlyn. Okay. Oh, Caitlyn, what a lot. All right. I think I can help. I have some very strong impressions about this. All right. So first of all, a 23-year marriage with somebody who cheated on you the whole time is so much, and especially given the way your parents just totally abandoned you, disowned you, shamed you, told people you were dead. That is terrible what happened to you. And at age 15, what could you have possibly done to manage it differently? What could you have possibly done better? It's, I just totally feel for you. This dilemma, it's happened to so many people in their lives, and the way your parents handled it, I'm so sorry. It's the worst possible way. You met this guy, Mark, and you were together for 6 months. So first of all, when I read all of this, I had to go back and go, wait, how long have you been together? 6 months. And I just want to say that a lot of the demands that were placed on you, I feel, are excessive for a relationship of 6 months. Now, everybody gets to decide whether they want to be in a relationship or not, and Mark does too. So you had this terrible relationship. You had a breakdown afterwards. You were just feeling better. You meet this new guy. You knew you weren't quite ready. But love came to town. Here we are. So you were in the relationship. Then you tell me about what came up for you was about being 15. Yeah. And disowned. And this whole thing where your mom was putting on a show by wearing black and going to church every day. And I respect people who practice their religion, but telling people you were dead is not part of the religion. That was her selfishness and her concern about what other people thought. And I think that's horrible. She doesn't sound like a very loving person. And I hear that she was a little loving, but she still doesn't even understand she has really let you down, and it's gone on for years. And I just want to validate that. And I imagine that in this marriage with the cheater, like you were so conditioned to think that you didn't deserve better. I don't know, that you were on in a ship that was foundering in a storm and just trying to hold on. You've been doing it all your life. So I'm not surprised when you meet this nice man and he's into you, that you, of course, you really wanted it to work. And I'm also not surprised that it was all going too fast for you. You weren't ready for it. He was putting a lot of pressure on you to be serious, to talk about marriage and living together and all this stuff at 6 months. Honestly, that's extremely fast. And especially for somebody who's recently divorced. And as we know, for somebody who's, got a lot of unprocessed trauma. When you mentioned the thing about, I say a sign of marriage is that you could be of service together. And he has this thing, he leads devotional singing or something. And he's a mindfulness teacher and meditator. And you say you have the gift of presence. I don't know if that's a sign. I think one thing that's the biggest sign that something is a marriage is that somebody can be with you and they will be with you. And so that's the kind of thing that sort of disqualifies the other things, but you know that, but I'm just saying that for the record, when somebody won't be with you, you have your answer. So he said he can't put up with all of this. And you hadn't told me what it was yet. So I asked you and you told me about this. So this is very interesting. So you told Mark that you still felt love for your previous ex and had hoped you could rekindle. So I don't know if you told him that at one point you had hoped for that or you hoped for that in the moment, but that would certainly be lobbing a bomb in a relationship to say, well, I'm actually hoping to get back together with my ex. Anybody healthy would have to say, okay, then I'm not going to be here. But I'm not really sure what you meant there. And what's interesting is that you didn't describe it clearly enough that I know, and you're a good writer and you're pretty clear about a lot of things. And so I was just wondering, are you disowning that part of yourself that was wanting that or trying to minimize it? Or if all you said was, for a while after he left, you were still hoping it would work out. And the reason I think that could be it is because some other stuff seems pretty normal to me. You told him that you asked your previous ex about how his relationship was going with his new girlfriend, and this was when you were 3 months into your relationship with Mark. And he says it made him feel worthless and like a second choice. If that's what you say, that's a very strange and insecure and controlling reaction to you just asking your ex how it's going. Now, to me, that's a very ordinary, I know he was a jerk, I know he cheated on you, but you were together for 23 years. So there is some kind of friendship there to ask, well, how's it going with her? So maybe there's more to his side of the story where you were, in light of the fact that you had said you wanted to rekindle, maybe that's what was making him react. So I don't know, but what you're describing here just sounds like somebody being way too controlling and thinking that you can't talk to your ex and ask how their relationship is going. That's not fair. You were defensive and you said you thought that asking your ex that was a measure of your detachment. I do too, if that's what it was, all it was. But in the conversation, Mark said your attachment to your ex really caused a lot of difficulty. So I guess he wants you to not have any contact with your ex. And I don't think I think anybody can ask that. They can hope to have a relationship like that, but it sounds like it wasn't made clear up front. It's pretty normal that people do have some contact with their ex. Sometimes there's children, sometimes there's, property, and it hadn't been very long. So then you said, I concede it was an attachment wound of some kind. And I'm not sure what you mean by attachment wound, but I think what you mean is you were just still attached to him. There was still an attachment there. And I just want to validate for you, that's really normal. Nobody can make you not have that. You'll get over it in your own time. It takes time. It hadn't been that long. You had been through a lot. You were also wounded. Attachment wound technically, yeah, well, who cares what it means technically? I think that's what you mean. It was too much attachment. It wasn't appropriate in your boyfriend's eyes. And it meant that you were not completely finished, which is okay. A person a year and a half out of a 23-year marriage is not obliged just because somebody else has come into their lives to be in a place different from where they are. Okay, Caitlyn, I think that you're getting an unfair shake here. So you said, I know I have to fully let go of the ex in order to be in a new loving relationship. Well, that's debatable, all right? People are going to date somebody freshly out of a marriage at their own risk. And I think that person needs to take responsibility for doing that if they know the timeline, right? So just after Mark discussed moving into your house with you and being co-owners, okay, huge move after 6 months. I don't approve of that timeline. I think that's way too, I know people do this kind of thing all the time. And even if he just wanted to move in, one thing, but own half of your house? Wait a minute. I don't like that. And then you said, perhaps I should sell my house and move back to another country where I lived for 2 years in an ashram with a teacher. So he was hurt. You're kind of speculating maybe it means that I was trying to be whole. Yeah, I think you were trying to be whole. I think you were being pressured into giving up half ownership in your house 6 months into a relationship when you still weren't over the horror show that was your last marriage. I think that's like fair. That's what it looks like to me. It looks like you weren't able to own those feelings. Maybe your freeze response, your fear of speaking up. You couldn't say, I'm sorry, it's too soon to talk about this. I'm not really over this. I don't know you that well yet. I want to get to know you. I like you. Let's just keep dating for a while. You could have done that, but that would have been hard to say. And it sounds like anything like that disappoints him. So you didn't want to, and now you're psychologizing yourself, but I don't think you need to psychologize yourself. That is really fast to give someone half ownership of your house. Or presumably he was going to buy it. I don't know. I don't know what the arrangement was. I hope he wasn't proposing something unfair, but it's not happening now. In another incident, you spoke to a friend who was following the same spiritual teacher. You kind of blurted out, you should go. See, that's... When you're recovering from a lifetime of abandonment and abuse, these types of questions, should I rush in and hold on to a relationship? Should I run off and be a spiritual person and retreat from the world? You know, should I be alone? Should I do this? Those are good questions. I can really feel it in my bones. You have not had room to consider these questions. Those are good and real questions, especially at your age 50 and what you've been through and wanting to do something new and different with your life. Maybe you didn't want to just jump right in with some guy who had these strong opinions about how you should be. Hadn't you been like that before? So I'm kind of proud of you. So this friend said, well, she had gone and lived in the ashram and she said it was a beautiful prison. And then you said to Mark and repeated it. And he said, are you implying our relationship is a prison? And you said, well, I need to make sure that it's not. And he said it could only be an implication. No, it couldn't. I think it sounds like it was what it was. You just said, I think you were saying, my friend saying that the ashram was a beautiful prison. I want to make sure that our relationship isn't a prison because I did that before for my entire youth and I don't have time for that anymore, right? Good for you. Good, Caitlyn. That's correct. It could have been a prison. It was right to take your time. It seems like your better angels, your wisdom about what's best for yourself, you have trouble expressing it directly, so it gets blurted out as sort of a contradiction to the other thing you were saying. And I get that Mark didn't like that. Who would, right? It's like, I thought you were into me. Wait, what's this? You want to go be a monk? Or, you know, what? It would be very confusing and a disappointment. And, you know, he pulled away. And that's okay. He has a very definite idea about what he wants, and he seems to want it to happen very quickly. And people get to do that. They get to set those goals for themselves. So you said there's probably more that you did, but he would ask you for reassurance all the time, and you couldn't give it. And it would take you a few days to produce the reassurance he was looking for. But he correctly notes that it doesn't really count if it was that hard to come up with. It's just not the nature of the relationship. It's not a secure little nest that he can hop into right now, which is what he's hoping for. So it's not that, but that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It's possible, Caitlyn, that you're doing everything right. You're trying to have a relationship, but really what's coming through in your healing is that still small voice that goes, I need more time. I don't feel total trust in this situation. I'm not sure what I can give. I do not want to end up in a beautiful prison. That's a coherent statement and appropriate for where you are. Okay. So you say you couldn't respond to his cries for reassurance and it destabilized him also. So I relate to that. I have been that person, but from where I sit now, somebody who gets all destabilized from an early relationship with a recent divorcee because they can't give reassurance right now, I could see somebody saying, I don't like that. That's not what I want. Okay, fair enough. But it destabilizes him. That sounds very unstable to me. So I just say, don't fault yourself here. He said he wondered why he wasn't important to you. He sounds like he has some issues there. And I'm not criticizing, like that's what we have here. We have these trauma issues. But that's like, I'm not important to you. I'm not this. And well, why would he be? It's only been 6 months. And I hear, I don't know, yes, you were inconsistent. So let's focus on you. You were inconsistent because you weren't ready to give that level of commitment. You did nothing wrong by trying out a relationship. I'm so glad you had that experience. The only art of it that's needed now is to be able to get through the end of it and carry on with your healing so that one day you will be more healed and you will be more ready for a proper loving relationship. And you just weren't. Nobody can be ready until they're ready. So you're good. You're in a good place. Then you went on and you psychologized yourself. And it sounds to me like he was putting pressure on you to talk to your mom with some sort of idea that you need to confront your mom about how she made you feel with that. All right, I'm going to give you a contrary opinion. Your mother sounds very self-centered and lacking in empathy towards you in fundamental ways, and that it hasn't changed. And I suspect, based on my little window of your world here, but based on what you're telling me, I think it's very unlikely that confronting her about that would go well. I think it's really unlikely it would turn into her going, really? Did that make you feel that way? Oh, now I see it. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What a terrible thing for a mother to do to a 15-year-old girl. You must have been terrified. We left you no choice. We hijacked your life. We treated you like you were a shameful object. I don't think that's what she would do. She does not strike me as somebody capable of that. When it's about telling your siblings about how ashamed you are, she's eager to help you with that. And that really bothered me, Caitlyn. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Oh, did you have sex at 15? Well, welcome to the world. Welcome to this generation. It's not ideal to get pregnant, but it happens all the time. And your parents made a decision for you to go ahead and have the baby and then shame the crap out of you for having this normal function of sexuality, a boy in your life, fertility, It's not ideal. If we never had trauma, we could probably figure out a clever way to do everything in the right order, right? But we didn't. We can't. And there's a reason for that. And even people who aren't traumatized have accidental pregnancies. And I just am so sorry that you got this message that you were a terrible, shameful person, that you were dead to them. That's so much about them and not you. And no wonder you had to stuff down this experience, and no wonder grief is coming back now. And I celebrate you having all the time you need to kind of deal with what happened. And I don't know, maybe one time you'll make contact, but that's the thing about adopted kids or kids that were adopted or parents who were the birth mother. It doesn't always go the way everybody hoped. These are tricky relationships. So no pressure. The beautiful thing about healing your trauma, and I happen to know that you use the techniques, you use the daily practice, you get support in our community, and I'm so proud of you and happy about that. And I'm confident, and I know that you are experiencing some relief and some clarity coming into your mind about what does it all mean, how do you really feel about stuff. And so all of these traumas and the losses, and including this guy who had this idea of what he wanted, and you're not like that, not yet, and maybe not ever, but you're beautiful and good. You're beautiful and good and blameless. And I don't believe that you need to confront your mom. If you want to, you can. But the thing is, if she's going to just use it as an opportunity to lay into you about stuff or shame you again, I'm just not sure that's helpful or productive. I'm not somebody who was I had abuse and neglect as a kid, and I did try confronting my mother and others who were responsible for what happened, and it went terribly. I was kicked out of the house, and that's why I have a pretty strong opinion that it doesn't always work, and that people who haven't been through that kind of trauma, they don't get it. Like, if they would do that in their family with their parents and go, hey, you really hurt me, it would be different, right? But that's not how it is. Like, we know that. We know that about these parents. And that doesn't mean you can't heal. That's some sort of weird equation. Throw all those old equations out of like, in order to heal, you must confront. Not true. In order to heal, you must become fully yourself and learn to process your emotions, your stress, and your dysregulation in a constructive way, and learn to find comfort and ease within yourself no matter what's going on. That's how you're going to recover. And to have friends who support you along the way. Isn't it beautiful that you're already doing what works? Talking to your mother is an option. it sounds from what you're saying, and again, I don't hear his side of the story, and I don't need to because he's gone. But you say it sounds like a sickening task to speak to her about it. Listen to yourself. Your voice counts. Your voice is the only voice that counts in your decision to do this. There's no need to do it. When you said you've become an extreme people pleaser and you cognitively understand that your mother's the one you're people pleasing, I think you were people pleasing Mark. You were trying to be the good patient who does what he thinks is necessary. You don't have to please him at all. You get to never do this. You get to do it in your own time. You get to do whatever you want to do. And other people can discover you, the person, and let go and allow you to live your life and heal as you heal and love you along the way if they've got the heart. If they've got the heart to do it. So I'm sure it's a lot to deal with right now, and there's nothing sadder than losing love when it felt like it was going to work out. I know. Well, there's things that are sadder, but that's a big one. And so I'm so sorry for your loss. It doesn't sound like the one. And so I can tell you have so much love to give, and you have so much healing to do, and your whole life. Isn't that funny how after the age of 50, everything can actually start getting better and we can come into full color and blossom at last? I'm very proud of you. How good that this is happening for you. If anybody is watching this and you want to do some healing on your ability to meet somebody and date in a measured way that's healthy, considering your CPTSD, I've got a course that's all about that. I walk you through the path that I followed and that I've developed over the years by coaching others. And it's called the Dating and Relationships Course for people with childhood PTSD. I always think I need a more interesting name, but that's what it's called. It's work that's very near and dear to my heart, and it helps you identify ways that you might have distorted thinking that gets you into relationships with people who aren't truly workable or available to you, and how to set yourself up to succeed instead by going slowly. I call it structured dating. One of the hardest things about being a young person who in childhood went through abuse and neglect is that you still think that if you just act nice enough, if you're just helpful enough, if you just give your unloving parent enough time and money and whatever they want, they will transform into the parent you needed then. But you never had it. And I think most of us go through this and find out that no matter how much we tap dance and try to win the love, it's not what gets us loved in life. And that's when the second problem shows up. And it's that boundaryless, people-pleasing tendency from childhood pushes you into romantic situations where rejection is the only way it's going to turn out. My letter today is from a woman I'll call Kirsty, and she writes, "Dear Fairy, I'm 24 and I've noticed a dating pattern that makes me reflect on my childhood trauma." All right, I've got my fairy pencil. I'm going to circle things that I want to come back to in a second reading, but let's read Kirsty's letter and see what's going on. All right. She says, "My father was an alcoholic. I remember being 3 years old and him asking me to fetch him beer from the fridge while my mom wasn't home. He would physically abuse my mom, and she finally filed for divorce 2 years later. From then on, he wasn't in our lives anymore, but relatives would always tell me that he loved me very dearly. Throughout my childhood, I remember my mother as this cold woman with little to no empathy and sudden emotional outbursts toward my brother and me. I remember one time in elementary school when a bully pushed me to the ground and I had scratches on my hands and my jeans tore on my knees. I was crying when I got home and I told my mother, and she slapped me for putting myself in that situation. Mind you, I didn't do anything. I was 8 years old. I never understood why she was mad. She was always very strict and would never apologize or say please or thank you. Even though me and my brother did everything for her. She had no job and we were living off welfare. My mother was home 24/7, but I can't say that she was there for us emotionally. I really have no idea what she did all day. During my teen years, she was controlling and wouldn't allow me to have a boyfriend. This resulted in me sneaking out to see the guy I dated at that time. I was embarrassed to tell him that my mom wouldn't allow me to date, but I also never gave him a reason as to why I could only see him after midnight. He later broke up with me and started dating another girl seriously, and now they've been together for 6 years. At 21, I moved out. She convinced me into moving into an apartment that is 100 meters away from hers, so we could always be close. She does this in phases where she's super nice to me. I regretted it. My mother has a second key and started entering my apartment whenever I wouldn't pick up my phone. She calls about 7 times a day to ask what I'm doing. Oh boy. I yelled at her, telling her that it's my apartment, my rent, my privacy. She didn't speak to me for 3 days and wanted me to apologize. I do everything for her. You hear that pencil? Circle, circle, circle. I bought her an expensive boots, a flat screen, a washing machine, expensive skincare, tires for her car. I take her with me on fancy work trips, and it's still not enough. She will always tell me that I don't make time for her and I don't care about her. The fact is, I would love to spend this much time and money on myself, but something is holding me back. Yeah. She's whiny about how her life was so miserable, and now it's in our hands to make it great again. Now to my dating stories. Oh boy. All right, turning the page. I feel like guys aren't interested in me for longer than a week. One time, I dated a guy for a month and I did everything for him. Ooh, there's that phrase again. I did everything for him. Just for him to tell me that he's not ready for a relationship. Oh, you thought you could bargain that, huh? Okay, we'll get back to that. 2 months later, he's in a relationship, taking the second trip this year with his new girlfriend. Another guy would take me on cute dates, text me constantly, but as soon as I had sex with him, he ghosted me. They always described me as beautiful, funny, fun to be around, totally chill, yet they ended up dating someone completely different, which makes me question everything. I struggle with my looks and contemplating having work done on my face, but something tells me that it's not the face. A year ago, I met a guy while partying, and he walked me home at night, but nothing happened. We continued texting for a couple weeks until I invited him over at 1 a.m. I really don't know why I did that. We had sex, and I was already prepared to be ghosted by him, and guess what? It happened. While he was in the bathroom, his phone screen lit up, and I saw that his background picture is a young woman and a dog. I told myself it might be his sister. Why'd you do that? I blocked him on social media because my ego was hurt after he ghosted me. A couple months later, I saw him randomly while I was in my car, and he saw me too. He called me after that, and I didn't pick up. He then sent me a text message asking why I blocked him. I responded by saying I didn't appreciate the disrespect and that I wished him all the best. He apologized. As I really fancied this guy, we somehow kept texting for an entire day. Oh, after all this happened. And then he hit me with, "You're right, I think this isn't a good idea." Boom, another rejection by the same guy. Again, 3 months later, I saw his profile on Tinder and we matched. He asked me if I wanted to come over. I was hesitant, as it was in the middle of the night, so I asked, "Why don't you come over?" He accepted. 30 minutes later, he had a lame excuse claiming his bike wasn't working and we should reschedule. We never rescheduled. The next day, as I drove to work, I randomly saw him on his bike. It felt like a slap in the face. How does the saying go? Fool me once, shame on you. It feels like he's just testing the waters to see if I would theoretically have sex with him again, only then to ignore me. The worst thing is I don't know what I will do if he'll text me again. I desperately want his attention, and I really want to know what drove him to treat me this way. But I also want to finally start respecting myself and stop being a doormat for others. I'm such a people pleaser. Okay, now there we go. Thank you very much for taking your time to read this letter. I'd appreciate it if you would help me go through this. Kind regards from Kirsty. Okay, Kirsty, I think I can help. Yow! Let's go through what you told me. You had a very rough childhood. You're 24 now, and you had an alcoholic dad who beat your mom and left, and you didn't see him anymore. And then you had your mom, and there's clearly something up with your mom, a mental health thing, possibly a neurodivergence thing, plus a mental health thing, but with her coldness and anger and neglect and her inability to be sympathetic or empathetic when you had gotten attacked by bullies, that was very telling. Something's definitely wrong with such a person. And she was always strict and would never apologize. She didn't say please or thank you. Interesting. I'll be interested in the comments if people have a conventure. What do you think is going on with the mom? It doesn't really matter. I'll tell you that, Kirsty. It doesn't matter what her problem is. What we're going to focus on is how you can change your life from still being in this problem. All right, so you didn't know what she did all day. She had no job. There was welfare. It sounds like she was at least depressed, but it sounds like even more than that. And then she wouldn't let you have a boyfriend, and so you snuck out. And then you were embarrassed to tell the guy why you couldn't see him, and then he dated somebody else. So Kirsty, first I just want to give you a reality check, is that dating somebody in high school almost always ends up with the other person dating somebody else. I don't really want to invalidate you. I can see something's going on here, but I first just want to set the stage and say, in young life, we date so that we can see if we're compatible with people. So almost in every case of somebody we date in youth, the answer will be no, and one of you will call it, one of you will end it. So I would not take that personally. But because of the situation you were living in with your mom, and because of that way that would have affected you psychologically, and the way that you related to other people, that you were way too young to even know what that was yet, I have no doubt that it affected your ability to date boys. And that's really common. Not being able to have healthy dating is really common for people who were traumatized as kids. And you were clearly traumatized as a kid. But now you're 21 and you moved out, but you say she convinced you into moving into an apartment 100 meters away from hers. So sometimes I'm tough love fairy and I go, I know you're only 21 and it hasn't been very long, but no one can convince you to do something you don't want to do. You didn't have to do that. And I'm going to really put out there that this sounds very unhealthy and enmeshed, and that one very clear solution is for you to move from that apartment and actually go somewhere else. And don't give her the key. She can't be trusted with it. The symbolism of you moving a little ways away, the things you told me, she acted super nice for a minute, and then you were like, oh, okay, I'll do whatever you say, I'll give you the key. Then she calls 7 times a day to ask what you're doing. I think that's just completely not normal. I could see once a day for people who are very close, or twice a day if it was, how you doing? And then later, hey, I need a ride somewhere. But 7 times a day is totally mentally ill on her part. And so I'm just questioning you. Why are you allowing this? I know it's bothering you, but it's you're the one who's going to have to set the boundary on it. So then you got mad at her because she let herself into your apartment, and you yelled at her and she wouldn't speak to you for 3 days. And then she wanted you to apologize. And you say, I do everything for her. So I can just see, logically, you equate that she was so mean, but I do everything for her. And furthermore, you bought her expensive boots, a flat screen, a washing machine, expensive skincare, tires for her car, and take her with you on fancy work trips. And it's still not enough. Okay, can we just make that definitive? That what you're doing for her is way above what ordinary people do for parents, even the best of parents. And normally, in a normal relationship between parents and kids of your age, there would probably be a little bit more, it'd be tilted more towards the parents do stuff for you. That would be normal. So when you're in this, you're utterly enmeshed, you're taking care of her like she's a child, but I can still hear it in the way you're describing it, that you think that she's doing something wrong, that you're doing all this for her, but she's not coming through and loving you like you needed to be loved. And I just want to show you, this is false math. She can't love you. She can't. She won't. It doesn't matter what you do. And she doesn't need fancy skincare or fancy work trips. Taking her, also, I just want to say, when you take somebody who is sort of against you on a work trip, that's self-sabotaging. I would advise you, don't take her on work trips. And then she tells you that you don't make time for her. Okay, so she's mentally ill. She doesn't read reality. She's very involved in blaming you. And I guess you have a job and she's very poor. And so that's why you feel like you want to do this for her. But I want you to just really face that the expectation that she can do anything in return for whatever you do for her. It's a false expectation, even though I get it, on TV and other people's relationships, there's reciprocal, and parents do think they're the ones who take them on vacation. They're the ones who buy them boots, not the other way around so much. But I understand, if you guys had a healthy relationship and she needed a little financial help, okay, but This is right now, it's affecting your whole life, and it's affecting how you see relationships. And what I see is that you've completely lost your sense of having any agency, and you also have not learned to have boundaries with people. And that's what it is. When you moved in 100 yards away and gave her the key, and now you're mad, you're mad at her, but she does not respect your boundaries. You are the one who must respect your boundaries. That's you. So a boundary, it's you state what you want or don't want to happen. That's a statement. That's a preference. It becomes a boundary when you act on it. If they don't respect it, you withdraw. You take away that possibility of them doing that to you. That's the boundary. So I would really encourage you to learn about boundaries some more. And you going in with this math that if you are agreeable and nice and you do things for people, that you will be loved. That's what I see operating. And you know what? You're just noticing that doesn't get you loved. Now you are a lovable person. So let's see what's going on with the dating. They're not interested in you for longer than a week. That's a very telling amount of time. So that means you're physically attractive enough to get them interested, but something goes on in the dynamic that it definitely doesn't work. I really want to look at this case that you told me. When you think, oh, I'll have to fix my face, it's my looks, I have to get plastic surgery, and you're right, it's not your face. There's no problem there. If I could go back in time and tell myself one thing, and it's the same thing I want to tell to all young people. You are so beautiful, you have no idea. And that's not what it is. It's the lack of boundaries and the way that when you people please, you become a non-person. You become a construct of a person that you think the other person wants. But nobody falls in love with the fake self that you become in order to make them like you. There's the problem. You met a guy while partying and he walked you home at night. Can I just tell you, meeting guys while partying, walking home with them at night, danger. So I thought this was going to go in a very bad direction. So that's not what happened. You continued texting for a couple weeks until you invited him over at 1 a.m. Okay, so Kirsty, you know what that's called, right? A booty call. And so if you're puzzled at all that when you invited him over at 1 a.m. that the whole thing didn't turn into love, I just want to say there's one place where I can see clearly why that wouldn't have happened. That just communicates boundarylessness. It's not the right time. And you say you really don't know why you did that. You had sex and you were prepared to be ghosted, and then it did happen. Yeah. I don't know who this guy was really, but if a healthy person is looking for somebody who has boundaries, who is self-respecting, who values themselves enough that they want to get to know somebody before letting them into their life, let alone their bedroom. If you act in this way with no boundaries and the 1 a.m. thing, it's basically like you just kind of like pushed all that aside and sort of said, I'm not that. So I don't know, maybe he was pretty messed up. I don't know. But I just know that sort of behavior is extremely unlikely to lead to a real relationship. It could ruin a good thing, actually. So you prepared to be ghosted, and it did. And while he was in the bathroom, his phone screen lit up, and you saw his background picture was a young woman and a dog. You told yourself it might be his sister. Okay, you lied to yourself, but stop lying to yourself now. He is in a relationship, possibly a marriage. So terrible mistake. You ended up sleeping with somebody who's in a relationship. You had no idea. He wasn't honest with you. Okay, so now we do know about him. He's a dishonest person. And you saw that, and now it doesn't come up in the story anymore. You saw that, you knew. And I'm kind of tough love about this stuff. Like if any of us is dating somebody who mistreats their partner by, trying to get together with us, that is bad that they did that. But if we know that they're doing that and we continue to participate, we're just as bad. We're just as bad. Like, don't do that to yourself. Don't do it to the other woman. And in a weird way, don't do it to him. Don't be the person who is enabling his destructive behavior. He's responsible for his behavior. But you are responsible for your behavior, and I think you have trouble hearing that. And this is so common. I hear this when people were not recognized as a person, as a child, their personhood wasn't really respected or seen. They have trouble seeing it for themselves. And so you're constructing a self out of what you think other people want, and then you're hurt because they didn't sort of see you as a real girl and a real woman and respond to you as such. They responded to you as what you presented. You blocked him on social media because your ego was hurt. It's more than your ego. It's more than your ego. After he ghosted you, it just hurts. It hurts to hope for a relationship with somebody and they don't want it. That's not just ego. that's pain, you know, that's sadness. It's risky when we love somebody, when we're interested. A couple months later, you saw him randomly and you saw each other, and then he called you and you didn't pick up, and then he sent a message going, "Why did you block me?" And you said you didn't appreciate the disrespect and you wished him the best, and he said sorry. But you say, "I really, really fancied the guy." So here it is. This is what I want you to focus on, Kirsty. You really, really fancied a guy who treated you like, and who lied and who cheated on somebody to be with you. You really, really fancied him. This is where I want you to zero in. This is where all your attention goes. So what's going on with you that you really, really of all the fish in the sea, that you pick one who's ghosted you, you know, who did some sort of one-night stand, who lied to you, you saw the woman. Like, why do you really fancy him? I can see this little switch where all of a sudden you went back into this constructed world in your mind that this was some sort of dating situation rather than, you know, this guy running away from his relationship. So we somehow kept texting for an entire day. It's not somehow, it happened because you participated in texting for an entire day. So it sounds like he was feeling you out for an affair, and something you said made it clear that probably wasn't going to go the way he was hoping, which was probably without consequences or expectations. And he said, "You're right, I think this isn't a good idea." You say, boom, another rejection by the same guy. You flipped a switch there. Your expectations go like, you think your mom will love you if you buy her the boots. You think a guy will respect you if, I don't know, like, what do you think changed? Nothing changed. And then he said, you say it was rejection, but it's not rejection. You got caught up he's an emotional shoplifter. And so it's not rejection. It was probably a good thing. Like, I'm guessing you accidentally stated that you had expectations or a boundary, which you should have for yourself. It's okay. And so it's not a good idea for a guy who wants no boundaries and no expectations to date you. So that's not rejection. In a weird way, that's respect. But then 3 months later, you guys saw each other matching on Tinder, and he asked if you wanted to come over. And when a guy asks you to come over from a Tinder thing where he's already rejected you, I don't know. You thought you were being self-respecting by asking him to come over instead, but that's not self-respecting either. That's hasty and impulsive and doomed, you know? And so he came over, and then he had a lame excuse, and he said his bike wasn't working and we should reschedule, but you never did, and then you saw him with the bike. But you're still in this reality, like, how could he have said his bike was broken? Because it's because he was cheating on you. He was in some sort of weird thing. He was just trying to have a booty call. And again, there was something you said where you accidentally disclosed that you weren't to be used for free like a sex doll, okay? Somehow, I don't know what you said, but he kept coming to his senses and going, this isn't a good idea. And at least one of you did. I don't like this guy, but at least he didn't follow through. But your mind is still like, you say it felt like a slap in the face. It's like, no, it's not a slap in the face. It's a blessing. It's like an angel came and scooped you out of a demoralizing situation that was going to tear you down. Who knows what his reasons were, but your reasons for not being there there's so many reasons for you not being there. And so anything that kept you out of it is a blessing, even though you can't see it yet. You say, fool me once, shame on you. And then you think that maybe he was just testing the waters to see if you would have sex with him, and then ignore you. And it's like, of course that's what he was doing. And if you want to find out if somebody has serious intentions for you, you're going to have to get to know them through proper getting to know you things. Nothing at 1 a.m. ever, not for months. And allowing them to call you and ask you out and actually go on a date and spending time getting to know them. I have a feeling, though, that even if somebody were to properly date you and get to know you and take their time and allow you to take your time to get to know them and see if there was a mutual, real interest in being a couple, which takes time. It really does. I think it takes 2 years. But if you could go 3 months dating somebody and see if they're sincere, you could at least take it to the next level, maybe. But here's what you already know about yourself. I need to start respecting myself and stop being a doormat for others. I'm such a people pleaser. And there it is. So when you are unself-respecting, when you people please, when you're a doormat for others, I know it's easy to see that they are using you for that, which is not cool. But also what's not cool is that you are offering yourself for that. And when you write your letter, I can see it coming. I can see it coming. And yet I understand so completely what it's like to have a blind spot to that. I used to do the exact same thing. I didn't know what hit me. I just would think everything's going in a normal way that could turn out well. Like, what's the mystery of why it's not turning out? But later, when you have your trauma wound a little bit more, in the sunlight, and you've been doing some healing and you have more perspective on yourself, it makes perfect sense that something that begins the way you're talking about, partying together, walking home, texting, the woman on the phone, all of it, of course it didn't work out. And this is good information for you if you can honestly face it. If you can have the courage to just say, yeah, that's what happened and that's how I cooperated with a bad start. You need to start your relationships differently, from a good place, and from a place where you work on your healing all the time, whether there's a guy in your life or not. That's the key to a happy life. What you've been through with your mom and her strange behavior. And again, I'm hoping people in the comments, maybe there's some therapists out there who can say, what is that? What is that pattern out there? I can't diagnose, but something is clearly strange about that. Whatever it is, whatever the name for it is, it's your boundaries that are missing for you in your life. And for you to start developing a sense of self-respect, to be able to pace yourself, to have some clarity about what you want in a relationship so that you can not date anybody who doesn't fit the bill. That's how you clear the way for a good thing to happen in your life. And I really, really hope you have that. Sometimes the person who is sabotaging your happiness in relationships is not your ex, not your parents, not the people out there who put you down. Sometimes the person sabotaging you is you. And the problem with growing up with neglect and abuse is that it can drive your thinking. It can constrict what you believe is possible for your life. And it can make you see only the worst, only what is ugly. Now, these are what I call trauma-driven beliefs. And you might be holding on to them because you think that they'll protect you. But what they really do is keep you isolated. They lead you away from the good choices and the positive changes and the healthy people who are capable of love. These are the ones you need in your life, right? If you're ever going to overcome what happened to you in the past. Now, it's true that the part of us that's designed to detect good people and to feel love and receive love can get so damaged by early trauma. And the more trauma happens, the greater the risk that we'll get kind of stuck in the pattern, falling only for unavailable people or for people who hurt us, or getting so lost in fantasy that we miss out on any kind of real fulfillment from dealing with real people. But the good news is, healing from past trauma has the potential to completely change the course of your life. And you might be really discouraged about that right now, and you just think, yeah, everybody says that, but how do you actually do that? But I'm here to give you real hope. There really are ways to start healing the wounds of the past. Now that we know what their nature is, healing begins when you make a decision to question your trauma-driven beliefs. Now, I've had a few miracles in my life. And the one that changed my life the most happened the day that I stopped having crappy relationships. And at the time, I had no idea why the same old hurtful and humiliating problems kept happening. And in fact, they were getting worse, and I couldn't make them stop, even when other things in my life were going well. Now, admitting that my old ideas and behaviors weren't working, like at all, was the very first thing I did that just put a crack in the door, like opened it just a little bit to transformation. And at that time, I was so unhappy, and I was so ashamed of the relationships I kept finding myself in. I could see, how other people were seeing me. And I couldn't really see a way forward. And I'd always thought that if I just met the right guy or looked prettier or changed one small thing about myself, that love could just kind of like show up in my life and do the healing for me. But it had gotten really clear that all my old ideas about how to do relationships had gotten me to that one night where I was so alone and hopeless. And no one was coming to save me. and that if my life was ever going to get better, I was going to have to change. Now, if you've ever had to admit this kind of failure to yourself, you know how, like, when you really let it in that, like, everything you've tried has failed, it actually feels like for a few seconds, it feels like you're going to die. But then, whoop, very quickly, a new feeling fills you up. And it's a sense of surrender and of peace. And then, thank God, possibility and even hope. And everything at this point depends on your willingness to get real and to take action and then keep taking action. Now, negative patterns, I happen to know, are very sticky. They're hard to get rid of. And even when they're gone, they try like hell to come back. And I tell the story of this transformation in my dating course that I mentioned earlier that you can find down in the description section below if you're interested. So when the change in me started to become visible, I think it was very, very obvious to people. And friends were starting to ask me, like, what happened? How did you do that? And they were calling, and I started making appointments with them to show them my techniques. And soon I was sharing my principles with their friends, and people I didn't even know would call me because they heard I could help them break their trauma patterns. And then eventually I started a blog called Crappy Childhood Fairy, then the YouTube channel, and then the courses and the coaching. And this amazing community grew up around it all. And what we do here is we learn to shed trauma-driven beliefs and become open to a new way and a more practical and rational and self-loving way of living our lives. So we learn to heal brain dysregulation, which is really common with CPTSD, and we learn to operate in a regulated state. And I'm telling you, when you're regulated, everything makes sense about why it was so hard before. When you're regulated, it becomes possible to deprogram yourself. And deprogram is a strong word, I know, but deprogramming is exactly what has to happen when we've gotten stuck in an unconscious and repetitive and destructive cycle of behaviors and beliefs. Now, behaviors are at least partly driven by beliefs. And when we have childhood PTSD, a lot of our beliefs came from trauma experiences. Trauma beliefs are cultural, they're family learned, they're reinforced by friends who likely also have childhood PTSD. And we usually know what we're doing wrong, and we can try to make ourselves act normal, right? Normal. But this kind of symptom fixing is usually only temporary. You can't sustain it. Real change demands that we identify those trauma-driven beliefs and begin to replace them. Now, normal people seem to just know this stuff, but those of us programmed by trauma usually need stronger, clearer guidelines. You can't just give us platitudes, it doesn't work. And we can't just talk about things, that doesn't work. And just breathing, all the things that are positive that some people seem to find help so much, like we need more, we who have CPTSD. So what helps, in addition to getting re-regulated, is to have clear guidelines about how you're going to handle certain situations that are triggering for you, that are slippery, right? You set up guidelines in advance, and that might feel at first countercultural, like unnatural or even radical, right? To have rules for yourself. But that is how to deprogram and then reprogram yourself. And it works. And if you want to learn the techniques for that, please do check out the links I shared. But just to help you determine if you might be carrying some of those trauma-driven beliefs that might be blocking you from love, let's talk about 10 of them, okay? Number 1, this is huge. I hear this all the time. I attract unavailable people. It's not a problem, actually, who you attract. I always say, I attract mosquitoes, but I don't sleep with them. The problem is that you are attracted to unavailable people. That's the problem, that you connect with them, attach to them, let them into your life. Whether it's because they're married or addicted or immature or not into commitment or just plain not into you, they are unavailable. And if it happens once, it's really disappointing, right? If it happens again and again and it's your pattern, it's blocking you from any kind of real love. Now, we're often attracted to people who are, whether we see it or not, about the same as we are. It's we who might not be available, really, for the intensity and the risk and the responsibility of being in a real mutual relationship, especially when, our mental engine is racing with dysregulated emotions. So freeing ourselves from the notion that unavailable people just like happen to us, they just fall out of trees and there we are, is the first step of deprogramming. It doesn't just happen. We're attaching to those people, okay? Number 2 is the belief that sex is how you find out if you're compatible. In the post-sexual revolution world, which is where I grew up, this is completely accepted by so many people I know as the way it is. It just is, right? But for people with childhood PTSD, sex can be more often how we bond with people who we don't know yet, before we really know if they're available or compatible with us. And then we're like bonded. And we have abandonment wounds, so we can't leave. And so we waste years trying to retroactively turn that person into who we hoped they were in the first place. We probably discovered like a couple days in that that's not what it was. So recovery sometimes means living by a different, more careful set of rules that helps us avoid those same old mistakes. And I call those the guardrails. And personally, I used and I teach a way of dating in a structured way so that you can know and be in touch with your own values and what's in your best interest, and prevent some of the stuff that happens when you're dysregulated or triggered from happening. You just kind of know what that's going to be, and you can set a guardrail against it. Like if I find myself trying to call more than once a day after the first date, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to like put my phone under the sofa. That's a guardrail. Because romance can make it really hard to think rationally about who to let into your life, especially if you have CPTSD. Number 3, another belief, you've probably been told this: I am always exactly where I'm supposed to be. Now, I do get the basic idea that even hard times can help us grow, but it can also be a total rationalization that's used by people who are in abusive, rejecting, or intolerable relationships to explain why they can't or won't leave, and to perpetuate a fantasy that actually they're loved on some unseen level. And in fact, it's often an abuser who has drilled that into their minds. But other variations of that kind of magical thinking are, I know that this person is terrible to me, but we had this incredible past life together, or God told me to just love them through this, or we're here to learn a lesson from each other. They're my teacher, right? Have you heard this? It's very difficult for most people to face the truth of their lives, especially when they're in a rut and when they're feeling lonely. Having a good friend, having a mentor in this area can be so helpful so that you can avoid all those old mental traps, because they can call you on it. They can say, yoo-hoo, I think you might be doing that thing again. And when you've made the decision that you're ready to change, then you're going to seek out that help. You're not going to avoid help. You're not going to try to hide from everybody. You're going to find the help. You're ready to be lovingly called on that kind of magical thinking. That's what helps, is to go, oh, right. That's not true. Okay, carry on. All right, number 4, here's a belief. When a partner has been avoidant or not faithful or rejected you, and you think to yourself, well, probably that's understandable because they were hurt before and they have CPTSD, and that's why they're afraid of commitment. Okay, that could be true, but whatever a person's history, if they are unable or unwilling to love you and be with you, there it is. They're not partner material. They're not available. Now, understanding or trying to guess at the source of their feelings still won't get you loved. Moving on is sometimes the most direct route to finding love. Did you know that? You break up, you just became like that much closer to finding the one, because this one's not it. All right. So here's another thing I hear people say to rationalize staying with, hurtful people. Well, they had a lot of childhood trauma and that's why they self-medicate. So here's the truth. All alcoholism or drug addiction is self-medication. That's what alcohol and drugs are for, to medicate feelings, right? To feel better for people who feel bad. And for a little while it works, and after a while it causes a lot of problems that make people feel really bad, not just them, but everybody around them. But then it becomes necessary to them. Whatever you call it, self-medication, it's not some like special category that's workable. Addiction is addiction, alcoholism is alcoholism. I always recommend Al-Anon. It's a 12-step program for relatives and friends of alcoholics if you need help getting clearer thinking around that. But whatever you call it, serious drinking and using make a person unreliable, limited in terms of intimacy, possibly dangerous, and just flat out not a good dating prospect. So when it's a close family member or a spouse that's got substance problems, there are more compelling reasons to stay in their lives. But either way, it's really important to set your own boundary. Like, do not rationalize what they're doing. Okay, number 6. I realized that my ex is an abusive narcissist. And I want to send them a book I found on Amazon about abusive narcissists. Now, I know firsthand it is so hard to stop fixing people as a means to get control over an out-of-control situation, or to rationalize why you're not getting love. But if you're diagnosing an ex as a sick and terrible person, and you think that you should therefore go spend money and time thinking about them and making contact in order to help them, your trauma brain is doing the thinking, okay? Being honest with a mentor has the power to break the spell and set you free to keep living your life without that person, all right? Number 7, we're just friends. We're just friends, just friends. How many just friends have you had? How many times have you been with somebody who had some just friends and it caused you intense jealousy and pain? There are, in fact, relationships where exes can be friends. It's possible. But there are many where one person is pining away for the other one and is too scared to declare their feelings because it would be icky to the other person and then go away. Or B, one or both of you is using the other person to fill up time until real love shows up, pretending that the new significant others, they're just going to love those friends too. Well, they won't. They're not going to like you being kind of slightly emotionally entangled with people. That's not emotional availability. And healthy people can feel it. It's all sort of a crappy dynamic, and it puts up a sort of force field around you that telegraphs to them that you are not available. So people who would make good partners can intuitively sense that force field and they stay away. The only ones who get through it are the unavailable ones, the jerks, the people who are high. They don't even sense the force field at all. Healthy people are looking for that bright, shiny availability and they know how to recognize it. Number 8, I need closure. Have you ever said that? Have people said it to you? Now, this makes total sense to the trauma-driven mind, but in real life it means I'm making up an excuse to reconnect. I want another shot at this. So you know what I'm going to say. There are cases where there was a serious relationship or a marriage and somehow one person never found out why it ended. And I would say eventually having a conversation about that might be important. But closure usually is only going to be a slippery slope to get you entangled back in the very thing that's making you emotionally unavailable and unhappy because it's with an unavailable person. 9, that person is toxic. All right, there's toxic stress, there's toxic emotions, but the concept of a toxic person, and I get it, like I have people that I feel that way about, like I just sort of fill up with dread and horror and anger around them. But in fact, people, no matter how they behave, they're not actually like radioactive, they're not a virus. They can't hurt you just by being around. It's that being around them causes a toxic reaction because you know what? You have been in the presence of really horrible people just screaming at you on the street. I don't know, where I live, we have people who do that. And it's something you want to get away from, but it's not deeply destructive. It doesn't make you, break your heart because it's not true. So this belief in a toxic person, I think it's much more helpful to understand that the toxicity is happening in the PTSD reaction that it sets off in you, which is not your fault, but that is toxic to you. When you fill up with the dysregulated emotions, that adrenaline, that fight or flight or flee or fawn response, now you're in toxicity. It's you who, in a sense, has become the toxic person. You're poisoned, okay? So when we're around people who trigger us that badly, they might be very terrible, but it's always a dance with them. So if nothing else, your part in it that you can control is that you dance with them and you don't have to. And you basically got triggered by their behavior. And I'm not saying it wasn't bad behavior, but it caused you to get emotionally dysregulated and lose your balance. It's more realistic to acknowledge that you have a toxic reaction around certain behaviors and that it's actually possible to become, neutral to people who are selfish or manipulative or abusive. Don't get neutral to abusive people, but just people who are, just very, very unpleasant. Abusive people, you really just have to, there's a whole line of action that you have to take around that to sever it, including calling law enforcement. But I'm talking about people who are, very cruel, very demanding, telling lies, that sort of thing. It's you who's got to learn to have the boundaries around them and decide whether or not to have them in your company. And when you have that boundary, you'll find that you're not poisoned, all right? There are no good men or good women or good marriages. I hear that all the time. I used to think this is true, that all good men were taken and I better just stay stuck in a crappy relationship. But this too was a justification. I think it's common to feel that way after somebody has really, really hurt you, and it just seems like everybody's like that out there. But I'm telling you, it's not true. You're not like that, right? Having believed that for a long time, I'm really sorry I wasted so many years on this kind of trauma-driven thinking, because really what it does, it telegraphs to other people that you're prickly, that you're hurt, and it pushes away good people. So with the good people pushed away, the only people I had relationships with were people who were not so good to me, not good for me. And then I'd be wondering, why does this keep happening? I must just attract these jerks. But that's what it was. That's what it was. And I was carrying my trauma as a way of expressing myself in the world. And it just wasn't that pretty. It wasn't sexy. Now, sometimes you have to shed the bad relationships before you can see the good things that are possible for you, because the bad relationships are the very thing reinforcing your trauma-driven beliefs. It just keeps making it feel truer and truer. So I'm saying question your beliefs and take heart. Become open and willing. You may not be able to manufacture this transformation in yourself on command, but start taking the first steps. Be open and willing to see things in a new way. If you catch yourself thinking everybody's bad and nothing is possible, catch yourself and say, wait a minute, that can't possibly be true. That's probably my trauma-driven thinking. Remember, healing is possible.